negatively correlated with that are percentage of people aged 65 or older. So this is probably in the US, right? So that means January is winter. So when you get high values, low values of this, you tend to get high values of people 65 or over. Trying to make sense of that. Just thinking if that's like the Florida effect, are old people flocking to where it's not too hot in winter. Okay, that's me trying to interpret what's going on specifically, right? But you can see these variables are relatively negatively correlated, right? Because they're pointing in different directions, right? So when one thing is high, the other one is quite low. Same thing here, percentage housing units, which are, I don't know, whatever we're supposed to say there, are negatively correlated with the average household size and the average annual precipitation, right? That's odd that these two things are happening to be correlated. One is not implying causation, there's a correlation there, right? So these points, each of these points probably refers to a particular region, or maybe there are 60 points, right? So it's not a state, it's some sort of region across the US. So these regions here are those ones with average high July temperatures, right? They also happen to have percentage of families with income that are something or other, whatever that is, that's also high. And high numbers of non-white populations are in this direction as well. Right. So what the biplot does is it tries and characterizes your PC, right? You've got this new axis, you've just reduced it down to 2 dimensions. Well, what does it mean? Well, I can try and have a look at how this axis relates to the original variables, right? That's what we're trying to do. And that's how you read your PC plot, your PCA, typically with respect to the original variables. Right. Okay, so those values that are really small probably don't have, they're projecting outside of the PC itself. So let's see what happens if we run the movie data. Zoom in. Zoom in on its ass. Oh. You guys see that? I just dropped the. One of these things. Almost. God damn it. That'll be right. Okay, so what do we got? What we have are 16 different movies, right? And they are positioned on this plot relative to their similarity according to how we like them. And we can then project ourselves onto this plot as well, right? So points that are close together are, according to our preferences, somehow similar to one another, right? Love Actually. And The Notebook. Oh, there's a big surprise. Those two things at Finding Nemo. And then, what have we got? We've got The Matrix, Inception, Lord of the Rings, right? Over this side. So what have we got? Essentially, we've got science fiction fantasy. If you guys know, do you guys know these films? Yeah? Right. I should hope so. If not, immediately go out and watch them. Very important movies. Here we've got Finding Nemo and Toy Story. Over here, Toy Story is pretty close to the center, so it's not, we might have like this axis is describing animation to some extent. We've got Star Wars and Solo, the Star Wars story. They're similar to one another according to our preferences as well. We can say that Hamish is clearly a Star Wars fan. Is that true? Yeah. As is Iris, apparently. Where's Iris? Oh, there you go. Right. And you probably like The Godfather as well, right? Chris, also in this direction, so he likes these films that are sort of in this direction. The Casino Royale, well, to some extent, but mainly The Godfather and Star Wars, heavily loaded in this direction. So, Chow, what do you like? You like The Matrix, right? Yeah, that sort of film. a lot of these films are sitting in the middle here, so they're not well characterized. And some of you guys with very small axes, very small vectors here, are probably not well characterized by this particular layout, right? As in your preference isn't really shown very well. Me and Tom, we have similar interests very clearly in our preferences. You probably like Casino Royale and The Godfather and Star Wars and maybe to a lesser extent Shawshank Redemption, which to my mind was the most overrated film of all time. But, you know. So what have we got here? You see what I mean? So we have how much of the variation is being explained in this data set? Well, we've got 31% along this axis, the first axis, and 13% along the second axis. So we're only explaining about 40% of the data. Right? It is a very high dimensional data set. There are 45, 46 of us. There's a 45 dimensional data set, and we're trying to characterize it. I've got some unusual people. Alice and Joanne, you guys kind of love romance, if I'm looking at you, but you also like sci-fi. Is that right? Did you score highly on Love Actually and The Notebook and The Matrix and Inception? You rank those as quite good movies? Yeah. Yeah? So would that be a reasonable characterization of you?
Oh, it's mainly because those other ones are good movies as opposed to the genre.
Right. It's not so much the genre as the movies themselves. Right? So you're right. I'm unfairly characterizing trying to characterize a genre rather than a specific movie. Okay. Lord of the Rings. Jamie, you're a fan of sci-fi. Where's Jamie sitting around here? Sorry, fantasy, Lord of the Rings, Shawshank Redemption. You're in this sort of direction, right? Yeah. Right. Some of these guys. Some of you with shorter. Chris. Where's Chris? Over here. Right. So you don't really fit very well. Your vector is quite small. So your preference is probably not well captured here. You don't have like a direction of movies here that actually correlates really well with your things, and that you might like things that are both, according to how these are spread out, on both sides of things.
I just randomly put the numbers.
You just well, there we go. So there you go. So a random person, obviously, there's no real structure to what you did. That was a great pedagogical example. Okay, Evan and the Lego Movie. Where's he gone? You're at the back there, right, Evan? You like the Lego Movie?
No.
Not so much. So this wasn't a particularly good characterization. You have quite a short vector, as is like K. Yeah. Cyrus is a fan of Love Actually, by the looks of it. Where's Cyrus? No?
No, for that's the worst one.
So you put that as what? As a 1?
For this,
There you go. Right? I was quite. There's always one, right? There's always one. So actually, you, sir, are in the exact opposite direction then, right? Because actually, this should be mirror image around 0 and flipped over so you like things like The Godfather and Casino Royale. According to this plot, sort of, right? But the main thing is you don't like the Love Actuallys and The Notebook, right? Which would point you in the opposite direction if you were scoring that lowly, right? So this sort of plot you could see. Never seems to like A Star Is Born. Poor old Lady Gaga. This plot can be used in a variety of ways, right? If you can use it to try and find, hey, look, there are a lot of people, say Alice and Joanne, like let's say there are a lot of people pointing in this direction, but there weren't a lot of products in this particular direction. You could say, oh, look, there's a niche there for romantic sci-fi films, right? Somewhere in between romantic fantasy films where these people would like it. Yeah? So it's usually quite, I don't know, let me know if you think this doesn't characterize you well. You've probably got a short vector. If you've got a long vector, then the arrow, it means that probably the actual distribution of the movies is a relatively good characterization of how you like it, right? So those people with short vectors might like things on both sides of the plot, right? Anything else? Lego Movie, Die Hard, sitting in the middle as well. Shawshank, Die Hard, these guys are hard. I think they're maybe everybody is sort of sitting in the middle, everybody likes them or not, I'm not sure. I'm surprised often Shawshank Redemption really sits far out in one way, in one direction, where a lot of people rate it very highly. Yeah, so it's interesting, yeah? I don't know if you got any comments. Anyway, I'll let you carry on with, hopefully carry on with Lab 4. And have you done Practical 4? No? Carry on with Practical 4. I'll talk for, I've probably got another half hour of talking. We could probably finish a little bit early today. And tomorrow, why don't we start a little bit late? What, 9:30? The later we start, the later we leave, I think. So, although it won't be a long day tomorrow, I think if we start at 9:30, we can still leave, you know, but after lunchtime or something like that. Well, we've still got a good few hours to go, but it won't be a full day tomorrow.